Thank you, members, for attending the meeting. We have a quorum. So let's make good use of the time, and I will invite the administration in. Item 1 on the agenda, confirmation of minutes. I'll invite members to endorse the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of April 2013. LC paper number CB bracket 1350/1213. The Secretariat has so far not received any proposed amendments. So shall we confirm the minutes? Thank you. So minutes confirmed. Second item, items for discussion at the next meeting. So I'll invite the officials to be seated first. LC paper CB bracket 1371/1213 bracket 01. A list of outstanding items for discussion. The next meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 16th of July 2013 at 2:30 p.m. and this will be the last meeting of this subcommittee within this term. And we're going to discuss the revitalization of industrial buildings next time. So do members agree with the arrangement? Any other suggestions? If not, then that will be the arrangements. So much for the list of outstanding items. All right. Third item. Issues relating to the subdivision of flat units, LC paper 1371/1213 bracket 02, which is a list of follow-up actions arising from the discussion of the meeting on the 30th of May 2013. Second paper, LC paper 1371/1213 bracket 03, which is the administration's response to CB bracket 11371/1213 bracket 02. Another paper is CB bracket 11117/1213 bracket 03, issued for the meeting on the 30th of May, which is the administration's paper on issues relating to subdivision of flat units. Another paper, IN 22/1213, an information note on subdivided flats in Hong Kong, prepared by the Research Office of the Electrical Secretariat. Last paper, CB bracket 1197/1213 bracket 01, which is a PowerPoint presentation provided by the administration. So I will now invite the administration to take us through the relevant papers. Who would like to go first?
Really a follow-up to the discussion at the last meeting. I think I would probably best leave it to members to ask questions and let us get straight into that if that's acceptable. I would just remind members, of course, that the purpose of the survey of subdivided units really is to try to determine the profile of tenants living therein and provide an objective basis and relevant information to facilitate the long-term housing strategy steering committee to come up with some recommendations in the context of the projection of housing demand. And that's the purpose, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So would the administration take us through the papers and the PowerPoint in detail?
I think we went through the PowerPoint at the previous meeting. So I don't propose to do that. That we can do, of course, but I think my understanding is members would prefer to continue the discussion that we finished sort of halfway through at the last meeting.
All right. So I'll invite members to ask questions. Any questions on subdivided units? We have Dr. Fernando Zhang and Mr. Kwok-hing on the list, and Deputy Chairman as well. 5 minutes. Dr. Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, this survey of subdivided units in Hong Kong, SDU, According to the administration, at the time, they said that they understood the existence of the problem, and they would come up with ways to solve the problems as soon as possible. In the long run, these subdivided units, which are in fact unsuitable for people to live in, will be replaced, and the government said that they would look into the problems first. So now we have the survey. In terms of figures, well, there are many people living in those homes, 170,000, according to your estimation, and we are now waiting for the solution. That is how you're going to solve the problems. So, you know, the number stands at 170,000. So what happens next? Previously, you said that a study would be conducted. Now we have the study. So what is the solution? Any mid to long-term measures to help the 170,000 people so that they can improve their living condition? And also, the study doesn't look into industrial buildings. However, we understand that the situation of subdivided units in industrial buildings is equally serious. We think that this estimate is an underestimation of residents living in subdivided units in residential as well as industrial buildings. So my question is whether another survey is required for SDUs in industrial buildings. And thirdly, I don't know whether this report is now available for public online. We'd like to get a copy of the report as soon as possible because we do not have the original of the report. Would like to take this question?
We have actually passed the original of the report to members. I'm sure the Honourable Member can get hold of a copy through the Secretariat. Secondly, as I've explained in my very brief opening remarks, the purpose of this is to determine the size and number. The next stage is for the Long-Term Housing Strategy Committee to use those figures to determine the demand for housing generally. It's one of the figures that will be taken into account. And when we come into the next discussion, perhaps we can go through that in a little bit more detail. In terms of dealing with the problem immediately, perhaps I can defer to my colleagues in Development Bureau and the other departments to explain what they are doing immediately, because I agree with the Honourable Member. We can't sit here knowing the figure and not do something, and that is not the government's intention. Government is already taking action to deal with the most important issues, and that is safety, particularly fire safety, to deal with structural safety and structural issues, and of course the longer term issue is how do we provide sufficient accommodation to remove these people into more secure circumstances. So perhaps I can defer to my colleague from Development Bureau to deal with the specific action that's being taken at the moment.
Yes, Mr. Chan. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chan. Well, as said by Permanent Secretary Mr. Pascott, I think long-term effort is required to solve the problem of SDU. But we are concerned about the safety, including structural safety and hygiene condition of SDUs. Now, we are most concerned about the fire safety of SDUs. Now, starting from April 2011, we have introduced a series of measures to tackle the safety problems of SDUs, including legislation and support and also education and publicity. Now, something on enforcement. In April 2011, in relation to SDUs, the Buildings Department began a large-scale operation. Every year, 150 buildings would be inspected, and these are buildings suspected to have SDUs. And we have increased the target building number to 200 since April last year.
And 30 of them are actually industrial buildings. And starting of April this year, because of the concern by the public for the means of escape of these buildings, we're going to look into 6,500 buildings this year, and to inspect buildings similar to the building that was burned down in the Fa Yun Street incident. And we're going to inspect the means of fire escape and to see whether there are any locked doors or any blockage to means of escape. The FSD and the BD have invested hugely into the inspection of these buildings to try to ensure the safety of those who live in these buildings. Thank you. Well, can you give us these results of the inspection? Well, after your inspection, how many SDUs did you find? And can you tell us about the number of cases where they are actually danger to fire safety? We want to know what's happening. We want to know the results. I mean, inspection is not enough. We want to know the results. Now, Mr. Chang, how about you provide us with the numbers and the results after the meeting? Yes, actually, in CB 1117/1213, in para 16 and 17, actually, we did give you some figures on inspection and enforcement. Thank you. Mr. Zheng, well, the Secretary has given you the original copy of the paper you asked for. It has actually been given to members earlier. Thank you. Although many members question the 170,000 SDUs, whether this number is really correct and whether it is underestimated, well, even if it is underestimated, at least we have a basic figure for reference. We welcome this. Because if you don't have any figure, then you can't really consider any kind of policy. In the past, you might remember that those who live in SDUs are those who are of low income or low education level. Well, many of them would have this kind of thinking. But the results actually show something different, because actually about 40% of them have an income of over 10,000 per month, and many of them are actually young people, and they're highly educated, and half of them are of the age 15 to 44, and over 70% of them are of secondary school level or of a tertiary education level. Well, people might ask, well, they are quite qualified. How come they still have to live in these SDUs? Actually, 60% of them are actually looking for convenience because they want to live in the urban area. Well, 30% of them suffer from economic difficulties, but the rest do not. They actually live in SDUs because the SDUs are in the urban areas, in the city, and they want to stay in that area. So that means that we do not have adequate housing or enough housing in terms of public housing or actually residential buildings in the urban areas, because many people cannot afford to buy private housing in these areas. Half of the people, well, I've already talked about those who do not have economic difficulties. Well, let us talk about those who are of low income. Actually, half of them are eligible to apply for CSSA, and many of them actually have not been allocated with PRH. Their average income we're talking about is 5,500, but they need to pay rent. Well, for a 1 to 2 person unit, they need to pay 3,000 to 3,500. So that accounts for over half of their monthly income. Well, do you feel pity for these people? Well, if over half of their income is spent on rent, well, do you need to be concerned about this issue? And for those who are taking CSSA, they only get about $1,000 rent subsidy. But if one person needs to pay $3,000 for rent, they would need to take this money out of their own pockets. So they will need to use the money actually used on food. We've always been emphasizing on increasing the rent subsidy. And many people still are still waiting for a PRH, and they are very low income. We do have to think of whether to provide them with a rent subsidy to try to improve their living conditions. They're already living in very bad conditions, and they also need to pay high rent. These people are living in very bad conditions. Well, what is a long-term strategy to help these people? What can you do in terms of a long-term strategy, or maybe help them in the short term?
The solution lies in more housing. There's absolutely no question about that. And this is exactly why the government is putting so much emphasis on the priority of priorities being housing provision. That means, and the Honourable Member is absolutely right, it means that we need to find sites, not just in rural areas or the new territories, but in urban areas. That means that we have to talk to district councils in these urban areas and convince them to accept the introduction of public rental housing. I can tell members it's very difficult to persuade district councils to support the introduction of public rental housing. They prefer private housing, they prefer home ownership scheme. So that's one of the issues, that we need support from the local community to allow us to build in the areas where people want to live. That's the first issue. Secondly, we need to look at how we can ensure that those people who are eligible apply for public housing. And the figures that surprise me arising from the survey is that there are quite a few people who think they're eligible but have not applied. We've got to get them to apply, we've got to process them, we've got to get them into the system quickly, because that's the best solution. Provide housing, move people into decent accommodation, and certainly that's the government's priority, Mr. Chairman.
And next is Mr. Jie. Thank you. Well, from the survey, we see that there are actually quite a number of subdivided units. Well, as Mr. Prescott said, we do need more housing, but this needs time. These SDUs actually might not be very safe, they might not be structurally safe, and there might be danger in terms of fire safety. So do you have a timeline from the government to try to resolve this issue? Well, if there is danger, is there some thing you can do, or can you find anything to replace them? Because the more you delay, the larger the danger. The FSD, I think, inspected 6,500 buildings. So what do you do afterwards? Are you going to come up with some sort of solution? Well, if you find problems, are you going to try to fix the problems? Enforcement is also an important matter, because if you do not enforce, some people would continue to make their units into SDUs because they find that they can earn more money. So how can you ask people not to live in SDUs or rent out SDUs? Because, as you said, some people live in SDUs because of the convenience. And how can you encourage the owners of the units not to rent out SDUs? I'm not sure whether there is any ordinance or regulation, because can an owner legally subdivide their flat for rent? Well, I'm not sure whether major changes to the building might affect the building, but can they officially do that if it's just minor works? I'm not sure whether there is any ordinance on that. So I want to see, what kind of a timeline you can give us. Thank you. Mr. Cheng. Thank you for your question. I think actually you can look at it from two tiers. First, starting from 2011, the government has tried to resolve this from a multi-tiered perspective to try to look into the building safety, especially in the safety of SDUs. And from a legislature enforcement, we have also tried to enhance public awareness. Regarding ordinances on SDUs, well, actually we have done two things in recent years. On October 3rd of last year, we started to look into the minor works of SDUs on partition walls and we have already put this under our monitoring. And it is actually a simplified process so that these minor works might first be completed before they apply to the buildings department. So actually it has helped or encouraged the owners to try to do this in a legal manner. And in July of last year, we also passed a law that we have given authority to the BD that if they suspect that there is danger to certain SDUs, then they can apply for a warrant to enter the building for inspection, to enter the unit for inspection. Because in the past, we were not able to enter the unit because that if you're unable to go and see behind the locked doors, you don't know what's happening. So with this warrant from the court, we'll be able to really inspect the inside of the units. Well, actually, the BD doesn't really have to apply for the warrant because once they tell the owner that they are going to apply for a warrant, then the owners of the units will be willing to cooperate. Well, you asked for a timeline and for enforcement action. The report from Policy 21 just came out, and we are able to better estimate the figures of SDUs, and the BD will take this into reference. We want to put the focus on high-risk SDUs. Starting from April 1st of this year, we said that we're going to inspect 6,500 buildings because they are these really old buildings. They are quite of age, and we inspect the fire safety, the means of escape for fire safety. Well, what kind of follow-up are we going to do after inspection? The FSD will inspect, and if they find that there is any violation, then they are going to take enforcement action, such as sending out a takedown order, or perhaps to sue the building owners. Thank you. Well, figures are a good beginning. We want to know of numbers, but you must be concerned about some other things. First, how are we going to meet the needs of future housing? As Mr. Pescott said, this is something we really must need to do, and it is not something we can complete within a day. We also need to look into the inadequate housing conditions of some people. If we're really going to look at a comprehensive strategy, we must try to look at how we dealt with the squatter huts in the early days during our colonial period. First, you must try to set up an registration system to ensure that the government will know the exact figure of those in need. Well, as you said earlier, there are some units that are of high risk. or there are some units that might be a bit better, you'll be able to divide these into categories and then to come up with solutions to help these people. But up till now, I still haven't heard that the government would be willing to conduct a registration system for these inadequate housing and try to make changes. And secondly, in this long-term housing strategy, when we are looking into the questions, sometimes it's really hard for us to really know of the actual situation.
Well, sometimes when enforcement action is taken, imminent accommodation needs will arise, and it seems that these needs cannot be addressed. And at the complaints office, we received complainants who are tenants facing this problem. If you do not have supporting policies on rehousing these affected tenants, enforcement action will leave these tenants in even deeper plight. So I think this step must be taken first. There must be supporting policies. So Permanent Secretary or DS, for unsuitable accommodation, will you consider imposing a registration system similar to what we had for squatter huts in the past? For new subdivided flats, you have the minor works system, and you can control the quality of the SDUs. What about the old ones? If you don't have a registration system, you won't be able to impose any control on such SDUs.
This idea of a registration system, I can say, is likely to be raised in the context of the consultation document. It's something that has to be considered, obviously. However, there are really serious problems. Unlike the squatter huts, where many, if not most, were on government land, where as the landlord we have a right of entry, we can walk in, check, we can see them. These are in private buildings. And this is one of the reasons that we've had to put in place, for example, recently, the amendments to the building ordinance to allow the department rights of access. So there are some serious differences between this particular approach and what we could do previously in terms of squatter huts. But I think this is an issue that needs to be considered very carefully, and I can assure you it will be looked at. The second point is that in terms of enforcement action, the priority, of course, is on dealing with dangerous, and it must remain that. And if that requires people to be moved as a consequence of the action by government departments, then there are policies in place to deal with the immediate rehousing. That is not, and I must stress this, to suggest that we're giving a comprehensive commitment on rehousing for those people affected at this stage by the notices to improve the situation, to bring them up to a safe condition. Because, of course, the other side of the coin is that with the numbers we're talking of, 60-odd thousand, you have to phase the solution. It can't be done as an immediate solution overnight. So we have to come up with a different series of solutions for the immediate problem and then the long-term problem. And that's the way we're approaching it. But I have to say there is a difference between the squatter problem and this problem.
I
agree with Mr. Pascott, but now that the Buildings Department can have an extra set of tools, you should also consider how you can manage the problem. Rather than causing more trouble to affected tenants. Mr. Frederick Fong. Thank you, Chairman. According to the government survey, the number stands at 170,000. But this is, in fact, just a minimum number. This is not the reality. I don't think your survey covered some districts and some of the accommodation like small houses in the new territories and industrial buildings, etc. There are SDUs in these buildings as well. If you include them in your survey, the figure would exceed 170,000. So again, 170,000 is just a minimum number. Secondly, I don't know how you are going to make use of the figures obtained in the survey. I don't know whether this will purely be desktop research, or will something be done? Public money should not be wasted. That should be a policy objective for the survey. And after the survey is completed, there should be targeted measure. So my first question is whether there is any targeted approach to resolving the issue to help these 170,000 tenants. Second point, I think at least in the short term, if you want to provide more PRH units, it will take at least 5 or 6 years. Now, I talked about the number of people, I will talk about time now, and I think in the interim period there should be interim housing to help as many people as possible. For those waiting on the list for more than 3 years, in fact, if they can get a housing offer in 3 years. I have asked the administration a number of times. Can you tell me the answer, including the vacated sites of the ERA and also other sites being repossessed by private developers and industrial buildings. In Netherlands, they have temporary accommodation, and they can be taken down in 3 or 5 years. So there is no concern of them staying on after 3 years, because they will be getting a PRH unit in 3 years. So can any temporary accommodation be constructed? Well, within the 3-year period, for example, you can provide interim housing in urban area for tenants living in urban areas, and also for those in extended urban areas. If you just put forward the survey per se, then I want to criticize you. Please tell me when you are going to have policies, Mr. Prescott.
I asked Policy 21 to explain the basis of the survey, but let me make 2 very brief points. First, I think if you've got vacant sites, we should be building permanent accommodation. We shouldn't be trying to move people into temporary accommodation which is substandard and inadequate. I was criticized at the last housing panel meeting for using interim housing with substandard bathrooms, etc., and that's already good. The idea that we should be replicating the problems of the past just doesn't appeal to me at all. I think we should be building on the sites that are available as quickly as we can and get people into them. So I'm not a big fan of this.
Well, may I interject just a response to the PS remarks? Well, redeveloping PRH estates, well, all these are standard units. They are much better than SDUs. If you have the site available, why can't you let people live in there for 2 or 3 years? And I'm talking about other vacant sites which have been left idle for 2 or 3 years or even 10 years. Why can't they use them?
Clearly, we can only build on government sites, and the sites that are available, even on a short-term tenancy, have a use for them. That's the objective of the sites being made vacant. The whole logic is that they will be developed imminently. But perhaps Policy 21 can comment on the survey.
Thank you, Chairman. May I briefly explain to members on the scope of the survey? Mr. Fong was right to point out that industrial buildings have not been included in this survey, but we did conduct another survey in relation to industrial buildings. The reason is that it's much more difficult for us to gain entry into industrial buildings. Due to safety reasons, we are rejected, and however, our survey covers small houses in the new territories and also rooftop structures. That's the case, but small houses or village houses is not included in this survey. We still have a number of members who are on the waiting list. We have another item coming, and that's more important. That's on solution to the problem and the strategies involved. So I will only allow members to speak for 4 minutes from now on. And we have Mr. Kwok-hing, Vincent Fang, Leung Chi-chung, Lo Wai Kwok, first round, and Christopher Chung, 4 minutes. Mr. Kwok-hing, you're in the second round. I want to complete the first round first and see how much time we have, because we need to move on to the next item. In fact, the next item is much more important as it has to do with the solution. Mr. Kwok-hing, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Well, it doesn't really matter. I will just make my comment, and that's it. Now, for example, there are measures you can do in the long term, rent control. I've asked many times, why aren't you willing to impose rent control? This will serve as a disincentive to SDUs. Second issue is for enforcement action. Are you really going to take enforcement action? If you are minded to take enforcement action, the market will adjust to the government's approach. Now, please listen. There are tenants living in SDUs. They say that if you drive them away, they won't be able to find accommodation. So it's phasing out procedure for rental housing. Well, third point, there are 4 major estates, North Point, Homintin, and Kwok-hing estates, all 4 of them in urban areas. These were 4 major estates. In the end, the sites were redeveloped for private housing. So what kind of policy is that? Well, Mr. Pascott, well, let me ask you, is it the case that Mr. Leung Chun-ying is saying that the civil servants are getting in the way? Why aren't the 4 sites developed for public housing instead? So what kind of policy is that? The policy is to attend meetings. So he is destroying the system, and he's putting the blame on civil servants, right? So please tell me, how have you come up with such policies? Why is it that you have vacant sites and you don't build PRH? Now, in fact, Mr. Frederick Fong was talking about rehousing matters. Well, you commissioned the unit to make projections. But in fact, you know which sites would be available for use. Well, if PRH sites can be turned into private developments, why can't you ask the town planning board to help? We're under the same government. There aren't 10 governments. Why can't this be done? Mr. Leung, would you like to give the administration time to respond? No, they won't be able to answer my question. I've asked the question so many times. And also Policy 21. Well, I don't know who is representing the Policy 21. Well, the government pays you money and you put up a shield to protect the government. So what's the point, Mr. Leung? Right, no need to worry. No worries. I've asked them so many times, Mr. Pascott, you don't need to answer. Well, I'm talking about the 10 achievements by Mr. C.Y. Leung, and then some say that it was the civil service which blocked his way. It was Mr. John Tsang who prevented him from making more achievements. So, Mr. Pascott, did you get in the way of the chief executive? If you did, time is out. No time for a reply. Mr. Leung asked about Policy 21. I think all members are aware of the fact that this is a response from the administration on members' request for Policy 21 Limited to be commissioned to conduct an independent research. Of course, I know this is a response to LegCo members' requests. This is very clear. I believe Policy 21 today has representatives attending this meeting, and of course I think you're familiar with the scenes at LegCo. Well, I'm not blaming them. Well, we have seen your work. Next, Mr. Vincent Fang, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, from the survey, obviously, there are at least 170,000 tenants in SDUs. And I think that there is really a demand for SDUs because of, say, convenience in terms of transportation, and some of them are actually quite satisfied with their accommodation. So even if the government is to take action, I don't think these SDUs can be replaced in a short period of time. So we need to think about the next step. There are two major problems facing SDUs. One is safety, the other is fire safety.
Well, the Vice Premier said that you see that there are around about 6,000 odd of them that are old buildings and might be a fire safety danger, fire hazard. So if we want to give value to SDUs, then perhaps we need to focus our effort to look into these 6,500 buildings that are of high fire hazard risk. Are you going to set a time frame to inspect these 6,500 buildings to first do this first? Well, if there is a good standard, if some of them are of high standard, then I think that we could keep those SDUs. Mr. Chang, please. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Mr. Fang. As I said earlier, these 6,500 buildings are of higher fire hazard, and that is why we have set a time that in 1 year, which is before April of next year, we're going to complete inspection. And during inspection, if violations are found, the vide and FSD will take action immediately to send out removal orders or to institute prosecution. Mr. Fang is right. Some of these SDUs are actually of higher standard, or maybe they are just in a minor violation that after minor works you will be able to continue using the SDUs. Usually you would find the breaches at the end of the corridor, the room towards the end, because it might actually be blocking the fire escape. If they would just take down the last room, then actually there would be enough adequate fire exits. So not too many of the tenants would need to move out. Well, these 6,500 buildings, well, if you're able to complete inspection in 1 year, how much time are you going to give them to complete their minor works after that? Are you going to give them 6 months or what? Can you give us a report, perhaps in 1.5 years, to tell us that, how many buildings are already in standard right now, so that we would be able to ensure their safety? Thank you. Thank you for your question. The BD and FSD in taking enforcement, they would have to adhere to a fine frame. Let's say they issued a removal order. The owners would need to resolve the situation within 1 or 2 months. Well, because you said that you need one year for inspection. If you give them 6 months to try to renovate the area, so can you? I'm asking if you can submit us with a report in 1.5 years. Thank you. Well, I'd like to clarify a point that, yes, I think that in time we'll be able to provide you with a report on the inspection. These 6,500 buildings, because we're talking about a very large number of buildings, and you are most concerned with the means of escape. So the BD and fire services are actually not gaining entry into the units. They're just looking into the building's means of escape, because that is the most hazardous area. So it's not actually a comprehensive inspection. We will not be able to do this within such a short period of time. We're just looking into the means of escape outside the units within the building. But if you want to know about the results, yes, I think we'll be able to provide you with a report in due course. Thank you. Yes, I think Mr. Fang's request is very reasonable. So I hope that after the inspection of these 6,500 buildings, I hope that you would submit us with a report on the inspection to this subcommittee, so that we will be able to see the effectiveness of this inspection. Yes, we would take this down in our minutes. Well, I've drawn a line. We still have Mr. Kwok-hing. Mr. Kwok-hing, you only have 2 minutes, because the next agenda item is even more important. We'll need to move on to it. Mr. Leung Ji-yun, please. I think the information from this report is very important. Well, tenants are living in very poor conditions, and they have to live there because of high rent. I think there are some issues we should look into it in depth. Well, you're inspecting buildings of 25 years or longer, so you don't know how many SDUs there are in the newer buildings. So your figures would be incorrect, because as far as I know, in Tin Shui Wai, Ka Hu, there are also subdivided units. But you know, these buildings are actually quite new, less than 25 years, so you wouldn't have the figures. So in Tin Shui Wai area, you find SDUs. So I'm sure that you also find SDUs in other newer buildings. So are you going to take one step further to try to look into whether there are more SDUs, because I'm sure that the number is over 170,000. For those who live in SDUs, they live there for convenience and for the lower rent. So most of them are actually concentrated in the Kowloon area. But if you look at the figures, it's very funny. On Hong Kong Island, it's over 4,000 units. In NT West, it's about 3,900. Oh, I think it's because of the size of the units, because some may accommodate more people, some less. So if you look at the number of tenants living in SDUs in Kowloon and Hong Kong, the number is actually quite high. So you could say that there are more employment opportunities in these two areas. Some members suggested providing them with interim housing. I think that even if you do that, you can only do that in Kowloon and on Hong Kong Island, because most of them would prefer to stay in the urban areas. Mr. Fong and Mr. Leung both suggested whether any temporary housing could be provided. I think that actually you could do this in a very short time. Mr. Prescott, you said that, it's better to build permanent housing than temporary housing. But when you talk about permanent housing, you would take at least 5 years to build. But you know, for maybe temporary housing, it would only take a short time for construction. Because, you know, we are all very concerned with the safety of the tenants in SDUs. And we hope to try to alleviate the situation. Do we have such a temporary housing sites in the urban areas? For example, can we use some vacant industrial building sites? The government can take back the land and try to build temporary housing for them. I think the government has a responsibility to do this. Well, you know, we've looked into this matter for a long time. If you're going to just do research will take 4 or 5 years, and I think that would be sufficient time for you to build temporary housing. I think that you need to have a long vision. Mr. Leung also talked about the the rent control problem, I would like to hear Mr. Prescott's views. Well, would the SDU's owners just freeze the rent so that those who want to rent cannot rent with a rent control system? I hope that the government will try to look at it from different perspectives, because we really need to try to resolve this situation. Well, I don't think you've given him time to respond. Why don't we leave this to the next agenda item, and Mr. Prescott can respond to this together, because the next agenda item will be focused on the supply of PRH. Thank you. Well, I think this report is really very important because figures are really important. In para 22, we see that in these the unsatisfactory rate of SDUs, you can see that we're talking about 14.4% of them are not satisfied, and then about 80% of them said that it's okay or they are satisfied. And then in the executive summary, para 24, they said that they are staying in these SDUs because it's convenient for them to go to work or to go to school, and some of them said that yes, and the rent is a bit lower, and 49.1% and 28.1% respectively said that they live there because of the low rent. So there's actually a reality why they need to live in the SDUs. And in para 26, 49.6% of the people said that they have applied for PRH, and 50.4% of them have not yet applied for PRH. So I think that this is something that the government needs to respond to us. Well, the figures have come out. So what do you think should be the short-term, mid-term, or long-term solution for this situation? We cannot just focus on those who are applying for PRH and say that, oh, let's move them all to PRH and that would solve the problem. Over half of them actually have not applied for PRH. And many of them who live in SDUs would say that, well, if you provide me with PRH, but you want me to move to new territories, they would rather stay in the SDUs because they want to stay in the urban areas. Well, for the subletting of these units, many of them would say that, oh, they would rather have their own individual kitchen, and so they would need to subdivide the flats. Well, it's either everybody live in PRH or you will be able to afford private housing. Otherwise, there would be the situation of subletting anyway. The need for subletting gave rise to the SDUs. Well, actually, it's an improvement from the days when I was young, because for the subletting, we would all need to share bathrooms and kitchens. But now, the situation nowadays is already improved. But so can you tell me about your short-term, mid-term, and long-term solution? Because, there is a need for subletting in Hong Kong. So can you tell me about your strategy? Who would like to take this question?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Not everybody has applied for public rental housing or indeed is eligible for public rental housing. So the solution long-term is to build decent housing in all the different sectors. That's public rental, home ownership scheme, and of course the private sector, so that there's a range. That's the first point. Secondly, I think the short-term measures we've described earlier really are to focus on the safety issues, the fire safety and building safety issues. Make these, they will remain. There's no way we can overnight remove them all, so we have to make them safe. So that's the short-term measures. And then in the medium-term measures, I've already indicated that there are some options that we can look at, options such as licensing, options such as registration, and so on and so forth. These are the things that will be set out in the long-term housing strategy review consultation paper, and we want to listen to members of the community, members of the legislature, their views, so that we can formulate the long-term housing strategy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Zhong, 4 minutes. I am in agreement with what the two previous members said. Yes, there would be SDUs because some people don't need such a large space. They may be living by themselves and they just want to stay in one room. That's very natural. You can't just say that you cannot sublet your unit to anyone else in society. Yes, the SDUs are already much more comfortable than the partitioned rooms we lived in when we were young. But the problem right now is high rent and inadequate housing supply. So that has given rise to many SDUs that are not safe. You can see that most of the SDUs are centralized in the urban areas because of convenience.
I think you need to address problems with the long waiting list and also on the safety problems with the SDUs. And there are suggestions like temporary accommodation. And you can actually work with industrial buildings to make these make SDUs in industrial buildings comply with the law. And of course, when we talk about a temporary accommodation, it won't be something like squatter huts. The conditions must definitely be better. And if you have such plans, then in a year and a half you can provide a lot of temporary accommodation. But the temporary housing must be in urban areas. If you move them to new territories, of course, people would be unwilling. So you should seriously consider it. Rather than letting people live in dangerous subdivided units in old buildings, and against the backdrop of long waiting lists, I think the administration should consider changing the strategy. You should gauge the situation and adjust your strategy. Who would like to respond?
This issue of temporary accommodation, interim housing, what have you, I think the honourable member is absolutely right. If, and I said if, we were to look at it, we'd have to find sites in the urban area. Not going to be very easy to find sites of a sufficient size to make it worthwhile, because you're talking 66,000 units that would theoretically be covered. You'd have to find the equivalent space for that sort of thing. So it's not a practical proposition. The other option is to look at some sort of approach where we could look at industrial buildings. Now, Housing Authority at the moment is converting an industrial building in Chaiwan for residential use. But as a member will quite rightly shake his head and say that's not the solution. The reason we have to convert is industrial buildings are not designed for the use as residential accommodation. The policy is to remove residential accommodation from industrial buildings. So unless you do a full-scale conversion, get rid of all of the incompatible uses like dangerous goods stores, like gas supplies, etc., industrial buildings have to be completely cleared and changed. They can't be partially cleared and partially used. So the industrial building solution, unfortunately, isn't a very quick solution either. The third point is, in terms of temporary accommodation, the honourable member again is absolutely right. Not all subdivided units need to be cleared on safety grounds. We've explained that already. What we're doing is making sure they are safe so that we buy time, so that we can move people into substantial long-term accommodation. And that, I think, is the best approach.
With you, okay.
Two more members who have just joined after the line was drawn. 2 minutes, Dr. Kwok-hing and Mr. Chen Yun-han. And then I will wrap up this item. Dr. Kwok. Chairman, the administration is absolutely irresponsible, at least from the survey. And this is already, according to some, an underestimated figure, 170,000 people living in SCUs. For tenants living in accommodation with imminent danger, I'd like to report on that. And for tenants living in these dangerous SDUs, what the administration can do to lift them out of the plight. I don't want to see the Matawai building collapse incident to repeat again. When can we see that? Now, on housing supply, well, it takes at least 4 years, according to your estimates, for accommodation to be provided for all of them. And I'm asking the administration whether you have new strategies. If you don't have new strategies, if this is what the government could do, then well, you don't really need to attend a meeting. So please tell me those with imminent danger. Dr. Kwok, we're going to discuss the new strategies in the next paper. No, I'm asking for the figures in the dangerous SDUs.
The first part of the question, but we can provide those figures. It's actually in the paper that we produced. I think it's section 20-something. Anyway, we'll provide those. But the other issue is, of course, members are suggesting it's 4 years. We have an ongoing public housing production program. We are already committed to 15,000 per annum. We also recycle a further 7,000, 8,000. So every year we're already producing sufficient accommodation to take up 20-odd thousand, 22,000, 23,000. We're gearing up to increase that. It's already happening, and within the next 2 years we actually have 20,000 units coming on PRH, on top of which we have the home ownership scheme. The numbers are coming on already. So that's why I'm saying we need to deal with these people as, in the context of the priority within the existing public housing program. It's not as if we stop, we've got nothing for 5 years. We have this supply chain coming in, and that's where the solution lies.
Ms. Chen Yunhan, Chairman, I don't agree with the PS and the DS. Now, Mr. Pascott is a very experienced civil servant, but you have been in your position for too long. When Mr. C.Y. Leung said the housing problem should be addressed, well, we look back at the situation during the Donald Tsang era, 8 to 10 years ago, and we're all experienced. At that time, we had some collaboration plans. We could provide 40,000 units, but now we only have, say, 20,000. You must change your attitude, PS. Otherwise, you won't be really facing squarely the long-term problem. So there should be a new way of thinking on the part of the administration, and Mr. Christopher Chung has put it very correctly. For industrial buildings, I'm not talking about temporary accommodation, like squatter huts. What about Meitung Estates or Cheung Sha Wan? Or no, in Cheung Chau and some other estates. Well, during the colonial era, the government was willing to provide some huts as temporary accommodation. Yes, interim housing might not be possible. What about making use of these sites in urban areas? You should really understand the plight of these people. There are over 100,000 of tenants living in SDUs, and these tenants have complained to us. They say that they live in very poor conditions. So, you are the Director of Housing, you're also the Permanent Secretary. Please think about short-term solutions to help these people. I challenge you, PS, please go to the district, have a visit with Mr. Ho Hei Wah. If you just put up a talk shop, you don't really understand the keen demand for housing. Chairman, I don't need PS to reply to me. I just want to make my comment. Well, he is a principal, he's a major official in the civil service for addressing housing problems. This is my criticism. Yes, you run out of time.
I will.
Yes, please do.
I can assure you the Housing Department is working extremely hard to provide as much accommodation as we can. Every site we get provided by government, we're prioritising and moving quickly. We've shortened the time frame. We're looking at ways that we can further shorten the time frame for construction. There is absolutely no question that this is the top priority for this government, and it's certainly the top priority for the Housing Department. We are very well aware. I have staff that are going out into these areas, into subdivided units, into bed
你親自睇啊，你親
How you personally go there?
personally out into these areas. I know what the situation is. So I have exactly the same level of urgency as anyone in this room. I can assure you of that. But I also have the practical reality of having to deal with what I have. I only have a certain number of sites that I can build on. If I can get more, I can build on more. That's the reality.
So I'll wrap up this item and move on to the next one, which is a review on the housing, private and public housing demand. And it's a review of housing demand for both public and private sectors. We have three papers, CB bracket 11371/1213 bracket 04, which is the administration's paper on review or housing demand for the projection of long-term housing demand for the period 2013-14 to 2022-23. And another paper, IN 26/1213, Information Note on Public Housing in Singapore, prepared by the Research Office of the Electrical Secretariat. And another paper, IN 14/1213, Information Note on Housing Demand in Hong Kong, prepared by the Research Office of the Electrical Secretariat. The Secretariat has not received. All right, they have? Okay. So, may I welcome another group of officials coming in, and it's under Mr. Pasca's team as well.
I'll just briefly introduce this. And first, I do apologise for the late submission of our paper. As the Long-Term Housing Strategy Steering Committee only just discussed the subject at its meeting last week, we were keen to ensure the paper incorporates all the views and comments made by the Steering Committee. So we apologise and acknowledge that this is late. Members will recall that we previously briefed the subcommittee on the government's preliminary views on the framework for the projection of long-term housing demand at the meeting in March of this year. Subsequently, the Steering Committee discussed the methodology for projecting the long-term housing demand for the 10-year period from 2013-14 to 2022-23 and looked at the preliminary projection results last week, as I said. Taking into account the net increase in the total number of households over the next 10 years, those displaced by redevelopment and those who are currently inadequately housed, it's projected that the preliminary total housing supply target would be around 447,700 units. But there would be a range for the projection from 416,500 to 478,800 units. And we've come up with this based on the results of an econometric analysis, and we can explain that later. I should add that the Long-Term Housing Strategy Steering Committee members will consider the distribution of housing demand at the next meeting in the context of their consideration of the draft consultation document. And let me remind members, the public will be consulted on the long-term housing demand projection during a 3-month public consultation period on the strategy review to be conducted later this year. With members' indulgence, I'd like to invite Anson Lai to take us through a short PowerPoint presentation to give some more details on the projection. Thank you.
Yes, would like to start first? Yes, I will make a brief presentation. Now, the objective of this paper is to brief members on the discussions of the LTHS Steering Committee for projecting the long-term housing demand for the 10-year period from 2013-14 to 2022-23 and the preliminary projection results. Guiding principles. Just briefly, we do not want to overestimate or underestimate demand and supply, and these are subject to a number of factors. So we use a series of projections instead of one single projection. Instead of a fixed target to reflect possible housing demand scenarios under different socioeconomic and property market situations. And over time, there will be changes in policies and other situations, and the projection results will be reviewed on an annual basis to provide updated projections. Projection methodology. First of all, we need to define what housing demand is, and we think in the long run, every household in Hong Kong should be adequately housed. And I'm talking about new new housing units. And it includes 3 factors: net increase in the number of households, those who will be replaced by redevelopment, and those who are inadequately housed. And I will say in more detail the projection methodology and the results. Now, net increase in the number of households. In Hong Kong, we see that there will be net increase in the number of households every year, and therefore a net increase in the number of units demand. And the CNSD's figures published in January 2013 in relation to the latest domestic household projections are used for the basis of assessing the overall physical housing demand from the net increase in number of households. And the average growth rate amount to 29,400 new households per year.
We analyzed the different households, including demographic changes, and we see that actually we're talking about the number of household formations with a range of 271,000 to 316,050, depending on the different economic and housing market situations. And this actually represents a positive -7.5% from the CNSD's domestic household projections of 294,000 households over the 10-year projection period. Well, aside from a net increase in the number of households, we also understand that some households might be displaced by redevelopment, because there would be redevelopment of old buildings in the public and private sectors. In terms of PRH, we are going to look at and based on the announced redevelopment plans from the HA and HS, we have also looked into the private figures. And so we estimate that in the upcoming 10 years, we're talking about a private and public of about 24,700 units that are to be redeveloped in the next 10 years. And we see that there are some redevelopment plans in many of the buildings under HA and HS, but right now we do not know that which estate they are looking into redevelopment. So we believe that when these plans are announced, that a certain estate would be redeveloped, then when we conduct our annual review, we are going to include the number of displaced households in our review, so that we'll be able to come up with a new number for that year. The third is on inadequately housed households. What do we mean by this term? PRH are built to accommodate the needs of the public, and those who are living in PRH are already living inadequately housing. For private housing, we would consider a few points. We would see whether these are temporary accommodations, such as huts, or whether they are unauthorized building works, and temporary structures such as rooftop structures. And we see whether these are households living in non-residential buildings. And thirdly, whether these households are sharing the same unit with other households, such as those living in rooms, cubicles, bed spaces, and loft kits in the private permanent buildings. And we'll also consider whether these households are living in units with observable physical partitions. Those who are adequately housed should be given adequate housing, whether in public or private, in the upcoming years. I've mentioned a few districts that house many people who are living in these inadequate conditions. The steering committee has discussed and considered that they would take a conservative approach and to count all of the households living in subdivided units as well as all households sharing the units with other households as having housing needs which are currently not satisfied. I mean including those living in temporary structures such as hut squatters and rooftop structures, and those who are living in subdivided units. And all these would be counted as not living in adequate housing. We have looked into the survey of the SDUs and also looked into the figures of the rooftop structures in Hong Kong. And we see that there are around 74,900 estimated number of inadequate housing households in Hong Kong. And apart from the above specific demand components, we also included a miscellaneous factor. We're talking about mobile residents. These mobile residents might travel back and forth from Hong Kong to the mainland. And another group would be non-local students. They come to students, they might not live in the student accommodation in universities, and they might take up accommodation in Hong Kong via private units. And there are also buyers from outside Hong Kong who purchased flats, but they didn't channel back these flats into the market. If they just buy flats without living in them, they're actually taking up our accommodations. So we also need to include this group of people in our miscellaneous factors. And so we're talking about a range of 1,500 to 3,000 units per year. Well, I've listed out A to D, and if you sum up the components in A to D, the gross total housing demand would be 428,100 units for the 10-year projection period from 2013 onwards. But we still need to look into the public-private split, and that would need further study by the steering committee. And we are going to adjust the private housing demand because we know that some of the units are actually vacant. And at any period of time, there would be vacant units in the private market. And therefore, we need to make adjustments by taking into account the possible vacancy rate. After adjusting for private sector vacancies at the beginning and end of the projection period, the preliminary total housing supply target would be 447,700 units, with a range of projections from 416,500 to 478,800 units based on results of our econometric analysis. So there would be different projections based on the different economic situation. Of course, there would be limitations set out in any kind of projection. We will not say that our projection is perfect. But we hope that we'll be able to deal with the limitations. We are going to review this annually to try to reduce the limitations. We would review all our assumptions, and we hope that we'll be able to provide updated projections every year. Members are invited to note the projection methodology and the preliminary results of the long-term housing demand for the 10-year period from 2013-14 to 2022-23, as deliberated by the steering committee. We are going to conduct a 3-month public consultation period later this year. on the long-term housing demand projection, including the split between the public and private housing supply. Thank you. Before we open the floor for members, I would like to address some questions to the administration. So when would this 3-month public consultation period begin?
Mr. Chairman.
So you would start consultation in September, October, November, right? So after the public consultation, what is the next step?
Of course, then the findings of the public consultation will be assessed by the steering committee, and then final recommendations put to government. Government will then respond to those recommendations and set out our long-term housing strategy.
And how long would that take? Well, you need to collect public views, analyze, come up with a report. How many months would that take?
At that stage, we'll be collecting the views throughout the 3 months, so I don't think the compilation of the report should take too long. At the end of that period, probably another month or so. I can't, at this stage, say exactly how long government will respond, but I would say that government, of course, is very well aware of the recommendations. We'll be monitoring the outcome of the consultation exercise. So again, because this is the top priority for government, without any doubt, I would expect a very quick response from government once that report is prepared.
I would also like to ask, in this research, there is not a recommendation on the split of the public-private housing supply. Are you going to wait for the public's views?
Chairman, there will be, again, another opportunity for the steering committee to look at this at its next meeting, and it will be included in the consultation report for members of the public to comment upon.
So how do you want us as the subcommittee, well, aside from listening to members' views, are you willing to hold a public hearing here so that the public can give views?
We would have expected members to arrange a public hearing. We're happy to come along and brief members on the recommendations in the report as well. I think that's part of our expectation. Can I just add one point? As members are probably already aware, government has been rolling out various housing initiatives over the last year. That will continue. So I don't want members to get the impression that the housing process stops because we're doing this exercise. It has not stopped. It will not stop. So any initiatives that are ready to be rolled out will be rolled out as we proceed. But what we're trying to get to through this exercise is a long-term strategy. That's looking at the 10-year horizon and beyond, and that's what we're focusing on at this stage. Thank you.
Members, well, before the government officially starts the 3-month public consultation, I'm going to work out a date with the Secretariat to hold a hearing to invite the public to attend the hearing and to give us comments on the projection of the long-term housing demand. So we are going to set a date.
Members to see the report. So I would suggest we carry that out during the consultation period. We'll agree a date with the Secretariat, but it makes sense to have that report in front of the public. So I'd recommend we approach it that way.
Yes. Yes, well, we would do that in the 3-month consultation period from sometime around September to November. Now, I'll open the floor to members. Well, we have Mr. Kwok-hing, a vice chair, who have given me their names. I think 5 minutes each for now. I know that other members would come back gradually. 5 minutes first. Chairman, well, it is good that the government has come up with this projection, because in the past we've never had such a 10-year projection. But there are some figures that I would like to ask about to see whether it could be clarified. First of all, on the increase in the number of households, because if you look at the census, you would see that for newly married couples, we're talking about over 50,000 a year. Well, we don't know how long we don't know whether the newlyweds will want to live in their own accommodations or stay with their parents. So I want to know why the estimate 29,000 is so far away from the 50,000. Well, you know that before you came up with the housing initiatives, we know that many of the units have been bought by non-Hong Kong residents. They're from the mainland. Well, we're not talking about non-Hong Kong residents. Some of them might already be Hong Kong residents, but they don't live in Hong Kong. They have their business on the mainland, and they would have bought more than one unit. The government said that the housing initiatives taken, well, I'm not sure whether, LegCo will pass it. I'm not promising anything here right now. Well, if it is approved, we don't know when we are going to bow down to the property developers. But, I'm a bit surprised by the figure. Well, you just gave me the number of a few thousand. It doesn't seem correct. Well, I think if you go to the if you go ask about the realty developers, I don't know, they would find that they would give you very high figures, and many of the units are actually bought by mainlanders.
Third point, there is no projection in relation to the public and private housing split. Well, we talked about SDUs, and many of the tenants are low-income earners, and they don't have many choices apart from PRH. And this research doesn't look into the median income of these tenants. I think not many people can afford private accommodation nowadays in Hong Kong. So that should also be an item in your projection. For the housing mix, it must either be 7:3 or 6:4. Or it won't be able to help people purchase their first home. Now, lastly, I don't know whether these figures are inflated or not. Now, we're talking about the 10-year projection. P.S., you said that you've tried your best to identify sites, etc. Is it the case that after making these projections, you will things will be left for the next term? I don't know whether the projections are correct, but for this term of government, we still have 4 years to go. So what are you going to do within these 4 years? One last question. The chief executive keeps on saying that the living space should be increased, but this is just a lot of hot air. Well, because the unit price now stands at 10,000 per square feet. You want to increase the living space, but it's not included here. Increased by how much? As Mr. Siwa Leung puts it, 20 or 30%? Any response at the policy level? You have some 20-odd seconds. P.S.
I was going to ask Anson to answer on the statistics, but let me just deal with the policy issues. Issues relating to the split between public and private housing, as we said, will be discussed. But actually, government has already indicated that, for example, in the new development areas, the split will be at least 60% for public rental housing and home ownership scheme, 40% for private. So we're already moving in that general direction. What this will do will allow us to be more accurate in terms of our delivery. So that's the first point. The second point I just want to very quickly touch on. The figures are not inflated. They're the best figures we can come up with, and I believe they actually do represent the situation as we speak. And the government isn't, as I said before, waiting for the outcome of this exercise. We're already working very hard on the production of additional sites. We've raised issues that have to be considered by the community, difficult decisions that the community has to take about reclamation, about resumption, about new development areas, about all of these issues that have to be addressed. That is not going to wait. That has to go now because it's too urgent to leave. And I can assure you the urgency is very much there.
No time for further supplement. I'll wait for a second round, okay. Yes, you'll go back to the queue. Mr. Chen Yun-han, 5 minutes, question and answers. Just to follow up on my previous question, because these questions are interrelated, I'd like to discuss this with Permanent Secretary. You said that you will try your best and spare no effort, and I really appreciate that. In the past, government officials in the housing department joined hands to resolve problems together, and this has all along been the pride in our government. Now we have housing authority, housing department, housing society. We have some relevant units providing housing, like the Tai Hang, and we should work together to resolve the problems in the short, medium, and long term. Chairman, 3 weeks ago, I attended a seminar at the Polytechnic University. I was with the Permanent Secretary, and there were organizations putting forward requests. Now, P.S., you said that you don't have sufficient land, but in fact this is not true. We have over 300 hectares of land in Kai Tak, and we are proposing increasing the number of units, and we have some sites, Tai Hang West and Mei Tong, etc. These are low-density estates managed by the housing society. Rehousing within the district. I believe many residents would like to live in PRH estates in these prime areas. We don't want to see the picture in which the poor are exiled to remote areas. I believe all organizations agree to this idea. For Edison Road, there is a project undertaken by HA, and up there we have private housing, and down there at the foot of the hill we have public housing. And we can in fact increase the number of units. We can increase the plot ratio. It won't block the view, and at that time the green sands, which are concerned with ventilation, etc., well, they also commended this proposal. It's about the determination. Do you have the determination to resolve the imminent problem? Of course, I understand there are short, medium, to long-term measures from the government. These are good ideas. Now, my question for PS. At the airport, can you provide more units? Now, for example, for Chiwanshan, back then, people were rehoused within the districts. The blocks could be taken down one by one, and rehousing effort could be faced. And that's how the problems were resolved. I'm talking about the struggle between government officials. P.S. Do you have any answer?
The coordination of government, joined up, aligned government, is exactly what we're working on. The Financial Secretary actually chairs an interdepartmental committee that is purely tasked with dealing with land supply. Everybody is there. Development Bureau, ourselves, Environment Bureau, Planning Department, Lands Department, everybody is there. And we pull in the other departments as necessary. For example, Education Department, etc. So that alignment has been in place now for a year, and it is working very effectively, I can assure you. We also work very closely with the Housing Society and other agencies, the Urban Renewal Authority, for example. And I have regular meetings. I actually sit on the board of the Housing Society, and I'm a member of their executive committee. So we are also bringing into alignment all of the housing delivery agents. In terms of the determination to resolve the problem, you can't get more determination, you can't get more commitment to this than the Chief Executive himself saying this is the top priority of all priorities. And I can assure you we are being pressured all the time to deliver quickly and to deliver against his targets. I can also add that we're looking at issues such as increasing plot ratio. As you quite rightly suggested, that's a good solution to quickly increase the number, because if we get decisions as we're doing the planning, we maybe get 20% or 30% additional. And in the context of the size of development that we're talking about, that could be a few thousand units.
Chairman, I'd like PS to briefly reply to me. Half a year or 1 year, Kai-Tak, can you give us a proposal? Can you submit a proposal to LegCo followed by a discussion in the community? This can immediately solve your housing problems. There are low-density estates nearby. They would like to be rehoused within the same district. Can you promise me within 6 months?
We've already raised some ideas. There have been suggestions that we could redesign the Kai-Tak situation. And as members will be very well aware, there was a very strong reaction against that. Kai-Tak has already got a committed outline. We've actually increased the number of public rental housing and HOS units on the site, but there are other uses for that site.
Chairman, I've been following Kai-Tak for over 20 years. I don't think it's a hard job for PS. I'm sorry, but your time is up. Sorry, Chairman. Now, I see more members coming back. They wish to ask questions as well, so I have to restrict the speaking time limit from 5 minutes to 4 minutes. First round. Next, Deputy Chairman, and then Fernando Zhang, Mr. Kwok-hing, and Paul Chair. Thank you, Chairman. 4 minutes. Now, the housing situation is in a mess right now because we do not have a long-term housing strategy in the past. So I support this new initiative. I am happy to hear that it will be reviewed on an annual basis. And as Mr. Pascott said, whilst the consultations are ongoing, the effort will not just stop there. This is something that I feel glad about, and about increasing the number of units. It all comes down to finding more land, because you need to have a piece of land in order to calculate how many units you can provide. Say 50 square meters, if you size it down to 30 square meters, then you can provide more units. So these are policy matters for the steering committee's consideration. That is to say, what kind of housing are we providing? And there are different strata. There are people in different strata of the society. About the private and public housing mix, yes, we need to consider that. But in terms of Hong Kong people's income and the soaring property prices, people are hardly catching up with the increasing trend. And in the short run, there is a small chance of a substantial drop in property prices. And this is not what we want, of course. So on projection on long-term housing demand, I think that we should rest on the conservative side. We'd rather have more in the reserve, because it takes time to produce units, and we can adjust supply to prevent an oversupply. But of course we need land, and this is the view for consideration. Yes?
Entirely. Ultimately it comes down to land. And that's why we're putting so much effort onto the production land. And as we said, it's not just about producing land for immediate use, but we have to build up a land bank for the future so that when the circumstances change, and they will change, let's be honest, housing is a cyclical business. Things change, prices go up, prices come down. You can only plan for what you know, and that's what we're trying to do. The commitment is absolutely there, but it does require some difficult choices for the community. We've already raised the ideas of reclamation, and we know people are going to object, and other people will support. We need this debate, and this is exactly the sort of thing that we need to continue to do. I would also say that the split on the type of housing has to be some flexibility in the system as well. So, for example, we're looking now at building units that can be converted quite easily. It's not easy, but it's quite straightforward between public rental housing and home ownership scheme. Because now that the home ownership scheme is centrally part of our housing production, the mix between public rental housing and home ownership scheme will also vary. So we want flexibility in our design so that we can perhaps do more HOS when the demand is high or more PRH when the demand is high. So not only are we looking long term at land supply issues, but we're also looking at the practicality within our existing portfolio to respond to the situation.
Next, Dr. Fernando Zhang. 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Long-term housing demand, you've come up with the projections, around 447,000 households would be in demand of housing. So in future, in order to address the needs of these households in terms of private housing, public and HOS housing, what will be the mix? And about the figures, the estimate is that there are 74,900 households which are inadequately housed, and the previous item was about subdivided flats. Policy 21 estimated that there are 66,900 households, so a difference of 5,000 or so, less than 10,000.
Policy 21 has admitted that the estimate does not include industrial buildings. I'm sure that we'll be talking about 10 to 20,000 from those industrial buildings. And as for the buildings of under 25 years, I'm sure that there are also SDUs. So this 74,900 is underestimated, and there are 23,000 families waiting for PRH. So what is your plan? You have all the figures. You know that there would be a new addition of 44,700 in the future. Right now, there are about 230,000 waiting for PRH, and there are many families that are living in dire conditions. So what is the plan?
Since he hasn't had a chance.
Well, let me first tell you about the estimate of those living in inadequate housing. Actually, if you refer to our para 17 to para 20 of our paper, well, we are talking about people. They're separated into different categories. One is for those living in temporary structures, and some are those who are living in non-residential buildings. Well, in 2011, in the census, at that time, we see that there are about 3,000 odd people living in commercial buildings or industrial buildings. And we also have about 42,300 living in these in the so-called subdivided flats. Well, why is there difference in the numbers? You can look at para 17 in our estimate. There are actually three figures. The first one is 7,900. These are those with unobservable physical partitions, which are those who are living in rooms, cubicles, bed spaces, and cock lofts inside a quarter. B, 22,700. They are with observable physical partitions and any one of the essential facilities. Well, I don't think you need to give us these small figures. Well, in future, there are about 450,000 families who need PRH. Right now, there are 230,000 waiting for PRH. How are you going to satisfy the needs of such households?
This projection doesn't just deal with the public housing side. It deals with all of the housing demand. So it's public, home ownership, and the private sector. So it's very important. This isn't just about the public housing.
So I want to ask about the mix between HOS, public housing, and private.
It's precisely one of the issues that will be discussed by the steering committee. However, as I've already replied, government has already indicated that its current thinking in terms of, for example, the new development areas is a 60-40 split between public, that's PRH, HOS, and the private sector. But that is just the preliminary position in respect of NDAs. Going forward, it is for first the steering committee to consider, and then we want to hear from the community as to what's the appropriate split.
Mr. Leung Kwok-hing. Yes, this has to do with town planning. The government said that in Kowloon East, you're going to make it into another central to build more commercial buildings, where you know the New York stock is plummeting. You're still looking into building it into another central. Well, yes, you need to look into the economic situation. Well, if there is a need for rapid development of the economy, then you will need more commercial buildings. Well, you said that, you know, the central rent is already very high, and so you need to set up another commercial district. Well, I think, you know, it's a huge gamble. Actually, you could use Kowloon East for building housing. Well, there is a school near the industrial area called Kai-Lik School. Oh, is the school more important than housing? You always tell us. Well, just now Ms. Chen Yun Han talked about Sao Mao Ping, that if you need to change the plot ratio or change land use, then it will take another year or so. Well, the town planning board chair is actually, you know, from one of your allies. So have they really thought about the economic demand? Well, I'm not addressing this question to you. Well, you talk about land. You know, how much land do we need? Well, you want to make Kowloon East into another central. We're setting up a cruise terminal. The whole city needs to support the growth of mainland and try to come up with a better economic growth. When you were developing the northeastern area of New Territories, we already said that there's not enough housing. And the public-private split is not good enough as well. You know, you can't just give me the figures here. It's a waste of time. Well, you know, the northeastern part of the New Territories, you know, nothing has been done, even though there have been changes in government. Well, what you are doing will probably become a white elephant. I think you must try to adjust your view to build more housing to meet the demand of social needs. Even if you say you completely agree, you totally understand, now that's not enough. Even if you agree, so are you agreeing to disagree? You know, nothing has been done. I'm not asking for you to answer, Mr. Prescott. The policy is totally wrong. I can tell you that Mr. Johnson tells people that, oh, be careful, don't buy property, you have to look at the economy. Well, commercial buildings are also property. Or are you going to just change the industrial buildings into residential use for later? Well, Mr. C.Y. Leung really needs to relook into his policy. I see many buildings not being able to rent out right now. So if you go to the bond center, it says low rent. Just walk out to Admiralty, you will already see the signboards. I'm sorry, Mr. Leung. Well, I'm sorry because we have members who wish to raise questions in the first round, so we need to reduce time. 3 minutes each. And please allow me to use a discretion as chair to extend this meeting by 15 minutes. Is that all right? Can we extend the meeting to 10:45? We must. So let's extend the meeting to 10:45. Is that all right with all of you? Okay, Mr. 謝偉俊、梁惠忠、梁志昌、蔣麗雲、馮劍基、鍾樹根. And I myself, I'm not sure if I have time to ask questions. Well, I'll be last. If there's time, I'll ask. If not, I'll just allow members to ask. I also want to voice my views. Okay, Mr. 3 minutes, please. Well, we have to limit our time within such a short period of time, so you can see that there's such a huge problem on the initiative of the government in terms of the issue of housing. Well, we keep on asking the government, asking how to solve the issue, but this is not the topic for today. We are just giving comments on the long-term housing demand. In your paper under A, you estimated the gross increase of households. It seems that you're using the supply to meet future demand, but it doesn't seem right, because if you look at the past 10 years, there has been many limitations, but actually that's in demand, but due to many reasons, such as not being able to afford it, people have not bought housing. That we cannot use that as a base figure to estimate the need for the next 10 years. Secondly, in the last paragraph, you suggested a plus or minus 7.5%. Does this include the current economic development? Just now, Mr. Leung talked about the current economic situation. Because we're worrying about whether there would be a crisis or a... So how did you come up with this figure? Did you look into the GDP of Hong Kong? Did you look into the plus or minus percentage of the GDP? And in projection D, you also raised miscellaneous groups such as mobile residents, non-local students, and also buyers from Hong Kong. But we're now seeing an aging population. People have different housing needs. Young people, I'm not sure whether they may have changed their attitude as well. So I think you should also include this as consideration into your upcoming 10-year projection.
In fact, the long-term housing strategy is looking at the housing demands for different categories, including aged, youth, etc., etc. So that is it's a factor, but it's not presented here, obviously. Perhaps Anson can answer the technical points.
Liza?
To the estimate of households, well, we looked at the gross net increase in the past 10 years, and then we looked into it, and then carried on with the continuing trend. But it doesn't we have also looked into the increase in new families, etc. And we use this method to try to project the upcoming 10 years projection. As for the plus or minus 7.5%, if you can give me some time, we can ask our colleague to tell you how we came up with this number. Yes, please be brief. Well, very brief. The base case is to assume the GDP on average is a 4.5% increase each year. This is the same as the past 10 years. And we assume that the GDP, in the case, we would assume that the GDP is a 3.5% increase. We're not talking about 1 year. We're talking about a 10-year range. So that is already a huge drop. So let's say that the GDP is higher, 5.5%, then we came up with this number. Mr. Leung, well, the paper showed us some figures in the early paragraphs and talked about the past housing demands. I'm not going to discuss the figures with you, but I'd like to refer you to the later paragraphs that members are invited to note the projection methodology and preliminary results of the long-term housing demand for the 10-year period. Well, you invite us to look into the projection methodology. No, this is all very academic. It's not really physical. We must understand the foundation before we can really understand the projection. But unfortunately, we don't see comprehensive information. Well, we don't even have the figures or the situation of the subdivided flats inside industrial buildings. Well, not only industrial buildings, even for some of the village houses, some of the squatter huts, we don't know, or we don't have the exact information. So how are we going to go forward?
Second point, in your way forward, you said that you will launch a consultation later on this year, including the split between the public and private housing supply. This is also a problem. If we look at public and private housing, we don't know the economic situation of tenants living in PRH. For private housing, there are a number of factors, say interest rates and the economic means. Well, you might come up with a mix, but people may not afford private housing by then. The most important point is that, be it public or private housing, the number one question is how much land you have for housing supply. And so far, we have yet to know how much land will be available for housing supply and what type of housing will be provided. Let's say if we want more PRH housing, you may face opposition. Let's say North Point Estate, well, it was formerly a PRH site, but now it's for private development. So what's the point? You still have problems with land use, and then you want to come up with a public and private housing mix. It's really difficult for people to comment on it. I think the most important point is that for long-term housing strategy, you need to help tenants who are most seriously and inadequately housed. So you need to address the demand side. All right, next member, we're running out of time. Still on Chi-Chang, 3 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I was talking about subdivided flats just now, and I made a number of suggestions to the administration. I've yet to hear their reply, and I'd like to follow up on that. The Government Steering Committee is looking into long-term housing strategy, and it is very clear that we need to have a 10-year plan. But I am not very confident about you reaching the target. say that you may have a reclamation proposal that may be objected by many others. So this is the difficulties facing the government. But despite all that, the government still needs to come up with policies, because the grassroots would bear the brunt. So, first of all, public housing. Will you be able to reach your target? Well, the Secretary always say this to us, including the Chief Executive. He also mentioned this point in the policy address. Production is far from sufficient. Now, I'm not talking about private housing. What about public housing? What measures do you have to ensure that you will meet the target? Second point, subdivided flats. Now, temporary accommodation. Will you consider identify suitable sites in urban areas for temporary accommodations, so that these SDU tenants who may not be eligible for PRH may be rehoused in such temporary accommodation?
I can assure the members that we will provide 79,000 public rental housing in the next 5 years, and we have also secured sufficient land to provide 100,000 in the following 5 years. Now, that's just the current targets. Obviously, if the outcome of this exercise were to change the targets, we would have to look at that again. But those numbers, effectively 179,000, has been locked in. And now, particularly for the second 5-year period, it's about, as the member quite rightly says, can we secure support from the district councils? Can we overcome objection from local communities? Because I'm afraid the reality is, in some districts and in some locations, we find it very difficult to persuade people to accept public rental housing development. There are objections. We need to overcome those objections. And of course, the third point is, we also need to make sure that we provide the full range of support services, such as schools, commercial facilities, etc. So we will do that, and we will work hard to ensure that. Very briefly on temporary accommodation, we are obviously prepared to look at any site that's available for development, but I don't control the availability of sites.
各位就
Members, we have 3 more members on the queue, apart from myself, Ms. Starry Lee. You are a newcomer, you want to speak, but like I said, I have extended the meeting time and shortened the speaking time limit for members, so I really can't allow you to be on the queue. I can't further cut down the speaking time for members. So I'm sorry, you're not in the queue. Please allow me 1 minute to speak. No, it will be beyond the meeting time. Okay, you can borrow some time from Dr. N. Chang. 1 minute, you're last on the queue. Dr. N. Chang, you have 2 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. A question for the administration. Now, at different times, due to different demands, the government will roll out different types of housing to address the demands. In the 50s, you have the rental housing. That's the former PRH housing, and then in the 60s, you had the HOS. And in the early 90s, apart from HOS, you also introduced sandwiched class housing. Now we don't see any more sandwiched class housing, but 20 years from then and nowadays in the market, we don't see new housing policies to meet the current needs. Nowadays, we see SDU is a very serious problem. Mr. Leung Chi-chang has made a number of suggestions. I think the administration should consider his suggestions. And also, there are young people living on their own, and you need to think about their housing needs as well. And there are people living in sandwich class housing, and there is demand for that. So will the administration roll out targeted measures to help the three types of people I mentioned?
In fact, these points are exactly what is being considered by the Long-Term Housing Strategy Steering Committee, aged groups, young groups, etc. They're also looking at the current composition of the housing mix, and that's something that will be put in the consultation document for consultation with the public before we take decisions.
Mr. Frederick Fong, several questions on the paper. Slide number 4, on the number of new households, 29,400. I don't believe that. For newlyweds, it's 30,000 or 40,000. For divorcees, some 30,000. So new families, or say, if they live together with other families, then this will be in conflict with what you say in the following. Now, that's a total of some 70,000, and that's in conflict with the 29,400 here. That's in conflict with slide number 7. Something's wrong here. Next, about the ABCD, it's not as simple and as accurate as the previous definitions put forward by the Long-Term Housing Strategy Steering Committee. Now, self-sufficiency, that's not what you don't have now. That is, the unit should be equipped with an independent toilet and kitchen, and it's not mentioned here. Slide number 10. You say that altogether, in 10 years' time, you need 428,100. That's 42,000 per year, and 22,000 public and 20 private. I don't think 22,000 would be able to help shorten the 230,000 on the waiting list. I'm talking about the 22,000 that is really needed by people for accommodation, not for speculation, etc. So will you include that figure as well?
Statistics.
Yes, would like to take the question, Mr. Lam. Net increase in the number of households. The net increase includes a number of factors: newlyweds, newborn, divorce, etc., death. All these are factors, because we're talking about net increase, and for 1P elderly families, there are a lot of them. We're talking about 13% per year. In fact, we are referring to a 1P household age 60 or above. That is, one elderly member aged 60 or above. And the death of the passing away of the elderly person will reduce the number of households. Mr. Christopher Chung is not in his seat right now, so Mr. Lee, 2 minutes for you. Question for the administration. On a number of occasions, they have talked about the pressure from the community on PRH projects, and they're trying to come up with increase in supply of PRH by converting, say, GRC sites. And I have all along said that you should have a mixed mode of development. For Kowloon City, for example, there is a site available, you want PRH, but people want community facilities. And another site in Yau Tong as well, people want a clinic and PRH. And in Sham Shui Po, the same situation. You want PRH there, and people ask for community center as well. And if you have this mixed mode of development, you can provide the PRH and resolve objection from the community. Will you follow up on these, and do you have any examples I really want a smoother process for you in looking for land in urban areas. If GIC sites remain for GIC purpose only, this problem cannot be resolved. I'd like Mr. Pascoe to give us some examples.
That's exactly our approach. In fact, whenever we negotiate with districts, councils and local community, we know they're going to ask for facilities, community halls or schools or what have you. We will endeavour to respond to that if it means that they will agree to the development of public rental housing. In fact, we came to the housing panel recently with a proposal for the conversion of a site from a welfare facility into a community hall that we will be building on behalf of Home Affairs Department. That's an example of the sort of thing that we do. So that process is already underway. And indeed, I would point out, public rental housing actually is probably the only site that we can put in some of the welfare facilities. The private sector simply won't build them, so we accept that responsibility.
Well, can I ask the administration to provide more information? Well, he talked about one example, but I raised several examples, and I think this approach can be adopted. I hope the administration could accept my suggestion and review the use of GIC sites. Which of the sites are facing pressure, for example, and can you provide a written reply after meeting? Of course, they can't give you a reply now. We're running out of time. I had 1 minute and some time from Mr. Christopher Chung. I've already given you extra time. Chairman, I ask for your help. As chair of some other meetings, I also give extra time to members. I've tried my best. I cannot give you extra time, and I'll see if the administration could provide extra information after the meeting. Well, this is with 1 minute left. As chairman, I don't have time to ask my questions, so Ms. Lee, I really can't give you extra time. So finally, I'd like to thank the Electoral Secretariat for preparing the papers, and we don't even have time to ask you questions. And finally, I'd like the department to take note of the information not prepared by the Electoral Secretariat. I think the papers are quite meaningful. Page 18 to page 20, they talked about a number of factors for babies, for families with babies born by mainland wives and also expatriates, etc., and non-local buyers. There are 5 factors, and these are the factors affecting housing supply in Hong Kong, be it public or private housing, and these are important.
So I hope that you would take note, because I don't have enough time to question. And then on page 24, it also looks into the Hong Kong 2030 study, reviewing the territorial development strategy for Hong Kong, and also looks at the population growth in the mid-term and the long term. So I hope that you would also consider the report given to us by the Secretariat. Well, we have already taken too much time. We'd like to adjourn the meeting now. Thank you.